The video I don't want to make, the video we shouldn't be making, the video that should never have happened. So we went through the INF Treaty, the fall of communism, 2014, the first Donbass war. I forgot in 2014 Russia hosted the Olympic Games, I think, did they? In 2016 it was the World Cup. So as Russia was hosting the Winter Olympics, it all kicked off in the Donbass. So where are we now? Right, so in fact, before we look at any of this, let's talk about the human cost and the suffering. It's easy to get caught up in logistics and the technology behind modern warfare. It's as fascinating as it is horrific. However, we need to talk about the human cost. The city of Mariupol is flattened. That's going to take 5 or 10 years to rebuild. There's various towns and villages in the Donbass that are flattened. That's going to take 10 years to rebuild. The casualty figures are hard to get your head round about and hard to get verifiable stuff, but it's reckoned between 100 and 150,000 people have died so far, which is just astonishing. They're mainly Ukrainian service personnel. So what an anniversary. If we had negotiated with Russia last year and have actually got their demands uploaded them to, if we'd negotiated with Russia, I'm sure this war would have been 100% unavoidable. So that's the important thing to get across, isn't it? What's happening to the Ukraine is absolutely heartbreaking. The amount of men the Ukrainian military have lost is staggering. And the people of the Ukraine, if you think about it, I live in Scotland. Scotland's got a shit government. The UK's got a shit government. We don't need Russians, Americans or anyone else coming in here and trying to get rid of our governments, do we? So that's the human cost behind all this stuff. So this is Donald Trump leaving the INF Treaty. And what's the date in it? I should have did this better, didn't I? Less than a year after Trump informally announced that the United States would withdraw from the 1987 Nuclear Forces Treaty, the State Department announced on August the 2nd that was officially complete. So on the 2nd August 2019, the American government left the INF Treaty. If you think about it, there'd been NATO expansionism up until the Russian border. Then in 2019, leaving the INF Treaty more or less was a signal to the Russians. The Americans were going to start flooding Europe with short range and medium range nuclear equipped ballistic missiles. So I'm going to say, Mr. Trump, that was out of all the dumb stuff you did, that was one of the dumbest. So what else have we got up here? Russian military intervention in civil war. So we're going to jump back a little bit. The Russians got involved in the Syrian war on September 2015. Why is that important? Because again, most of the wars in the Middle East are generated by the American government and the CIA. They're usually generated to govern energy supplies and predominantly oil. Now, don't forget, Russia was Europe's biggest supplier of natural gas and oil, so I'm going to call out the Ukraine war in all its horrors as being a war over energy supplies into Europe. Next reason the Russian military's intervention in Syria is important is because the people that were fighting in Syria, it was similar to when the Americans attacked Iraq. They were up against an army that weren't anywhere near as competent or capable or able as the American military. So the Russian Air Force have been in Syria since 2015, what's that, 8 years ago? And all they've been doing is practicing with their Air Force. It's the best live fire training exercise the Russian Air Forces ever had, haven't they? They've had 8 years in Syria targeting jihadi extremism, just blowing them up with aeroplanes. They're not up against surface to air missile systems or any serious air defence system. However, the important thing to remember here is the Russian Air Force have been practicing. It was a terrible way of thinking about it, because again, regardless of who they're attacking, even if they are mad jihadi guys, they're still killing these people. But the Russian military, the Russian Air Force, have had 8 years worth of practice in Syria, perfecting their techniques in war-torn countries. So I'm going to leave this one here. I'll read this to you, right? These are the demands the Russian government issued to NATO, America, the EU last December, not December there, but December before the actual war started. So the demands spelled out by Moscow in full for the first time were handed to the US this week. They included a demand NATO remove any troops or weapons deployed to countries that entered the alliance after 1997. So basically, any countries that became westernised post-communist era had to get rid of their NATO weapons. That included much of Eastern Europe, Poland, former Soviet countries of Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, and the Balkan countries. So again, these are all within the INF distance in the missiles for actual hitting Russia. Russia also demanded that NATO rule out further expansion, including annexation of the Ukraine into the alliance, and it does not hold drills without previous agreement to Russia in Eastern Europe, in the Caucasus countries such as Georgia and in Central Asia. The proposals were viewed extremely negatively with NATO, so NATO says hoof it, and they warned that Russia was trying to re-establish a sphere of influence in the region. That could be accurate. It could also be NATO doublespeak, for the Russians do not want short-range nuclear-capable ballistic missiles on the border. So then Jens Stoltenberg, I can't stand that guy. He's the biggest idiot, or one of the biggest idiots in Europe. Jens Stoltenberg told the Russians to hoof it. They weren't going to do it. The Russian document also calls for the two countries to pull back any short or medium range missile systems out of reach, replacing the previous intermediate nuclear force, the INF Treaty, the USA left in 2018. Jen Psaki is another person I absolutely can't stand. She says, no, we're not going to do that. The Russian Deputy Foreign Minister, Sergei Shoigu, so the head of Imperial College in Moscow wrote that Russia's public release of its proposed agreements may suggest that Moscow considers their acceptance by the West unlikely. So they issued a series of demands. NATO goes back to where it was post-fall of the communist area. There'd be no NATO weapons drills in the former Baltic countries or the Eastern Bloc countries. Ukraine had to be neutral, and Ukraine wouldn't join NATO. So the last thought I'm going to leave this one on is, why would Russia have the right to say to a sovereign country what it can and can't do? Surely it should have been up to the Ukraine whether they wanted to join NATO, because as a sovereign country, the Ukraine had the choice to do whatever the hell it wanted. I think the best answer I can come up with to that is, if you join NATO, you've lost your sovereignty. You're now a vassal to the American empire. NATO is a mafia-esque protection racket, isn't it? You give the American government 2% of your country's GDP, which they then hand over to Americans' weapon manufacturers. So it's just a way of cycling money around. And if anything the past year has shown us, it's that NATO is a paper tiger, isn't it? They didn't go full on in the Ukraine. They don't have the weapon systems to take on Russia. So the biggest threat that NATO told European countries they were facing was an invasion from the USSR and an invasion from Russia. Now we've actually seen Russian military tactics. NATO can't deal with it, they can't cope with it. So what's been NATO? Didn't want to make this video. I might do another one because we've now basically got to Russia issuing the demands. And in February, on this date last year, they actually did something militarily. Might do one more, might not. It's got to get back to the Bob Cave, falafels and all this type of stuff. The usual van restoration things on my channel. So thanks for, if you have watched and followed the videos, thanks for sticking with it. Again, politics isn't what the channel's about. However, it's such a horrific date in European history, in world history, that I think it was my time doing a little bit of research that I did and putting these on my channel. Should finish up. That's over 11 minutes. They're taking far too long. Personally, again, it's a motive. Over a possible 100 to 150,000 people have already been killed in the conflict, mainly Ukrainian and Russian service personnel. I mean, that's staggering, isn't it? Not one country in Europe, with the exception of maybe Hungary, not one country in Europe. In carrot and stick diplomacy, you need somebody to offer the carrot. No country in Europe has offered the carrot. They've all just offered the stick. Ramped up weapon supplies. The weapons we're sending into Ukraine are pouring fuel on the fire. It's not helping reach any type of peace settlement, ceasefire, negotiated peace or anything. We needed somebody to have an honest look at the Russian demands, which weren't too demanding, were they? They don't want nuclear weapons on their border. And a year later, we know they are prepared to fight not to have American nuclear weapons on their border. My gut tells me that every demand Russia has made, they're prepared to fight to get. And my gut also tells me that NATO and Europe don't have the equipment, the manpower or anything else to fight Russia. If NATO was in a position to go head to head with Russia, as soon as the conflict happened, NATO would have been straight in there with the fighter jets, blowing stuff up left, right and centre, like they did in Iraq, Libya, Syria. They'd have tried it on. They don't have the power because Russia's nuclear doctrine states if there's an existential threat to their country, they use their nuclear arsenal. So that means it's a catch-22, isn't it? If Russia feels as if they're getting beaten in the battlefield, they're going to start firing nukes off. So the only way out of this, as far as I can tell, is a negotiated ceasefire and a settlement. And the Russians aren't going to negotiate on the points they sent to NATO, their demands now. If they don't get their demands, the war continues. So we need some amazing diplomats in there, and if you're religious, let's pray for the Ukraine, you know. What's happening in their country is just astonishing. Right, thanks for watching 13 minutes of me talking crap to my phone. Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.